everybody, to the third session of the 2026 edition of the Sephardi Modernity Seminar Series, co-sponsored by the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis University and the Calgary Institute for the Humanities at the University of Calgary, with the support of the Belzberg Program for Israel Studies. The title of this year's series is Diasporas, Sephardi Perspectives, and as usual, it is organized by Yuval Evri and me, Angy Cohen. This is the sixth edition of this seminar. The Sephardi Modernity Seminar Series was conceived as a transnational space for conversation among scholars interested in rethinking Sephardi history and experience beyond the dominant frameworks of Jewish studies. From the outset, the series emerged from a shared dissatisfaction with interpretive models grounded primarily in European Jewish experiences, which often prove insufficient for understanding processes of modernization in Sephardi, Middle Eastern, and Arab Jewish contexts. Every time, we feel privileged to count on your support and participation.
Yes, this year, the seminar takes diaspora as a key lens for understanding the modern and contemporary Sephardi world. Through Sephardi histories shaped by imperial, colonial, and post-colonial contexts, the series explores themes such as multiple belonging, identity formation, migration and return, and the circulation of culture and memory. Our speakers examines how Sephardi communities have navigated life across different places and contexts, often rethinking ideas of home, tradition, and modernity in their process.
We opened the series with a lecture by David Nahar, who approached diaspora through Edgar Morin's notion of multi-rootedness, challenging ideas of Jewish rootlessness while also resisting ranked models of belonging. Drawing on Judo-Spanish cultural production in the United States, Devin offered a rich framework for thinking about Sephardi diasporic trajectories across generations. The second session was led by Omar Bohm, who reconstructed the history and migration trajectory of the Marciano family, the founders of the clothing brand Guess, as part of the formation of the Moroccan Jewish diaspora in the United States, focusing on post-World War II migration to North America and the emergence of communities in cities such as New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. Omar Bohm examined how Moroccan Jews negotiated Sephardi identity and economic participation through work in the fashion industry. Drawing on more than a decade of ethnographic research, he introduced the concept of sartorial funds of knowledge, embodied and socially transmitted repertoires of expertise that Moroccan immigrants mobilized through family networks and community ties.
So today we are welcoming Professor André Levy to our seminar. Professor Levy is an anthropologist whose work focuses on Moroccan Jewish communities in Morocco and Israel. His research explores Jewish-Muslim relations, collective memory, diaspora, Mizrahi identity, ritual life, and urban experience, and is grounded in long-term ethnographic fieldwork. He is the author of Return to Casablanca, published by University of Chicago Press, and ethnography of the Jewish community of Casablanca, and with Alex Weingord, co-editor of Homelands and Diasporas, published by Stanford University Press. In Hebrew, he edited a book in honor of Yoram Bilu, and has also translated edited Hebrew translation of key anthropological works by Turner, Douglas, and Malinowski, and Gretz. His articles have appeared in journals such as an American Ethnologist, Cultural Anthropology, and Anthropological Quarterly. Across his work, André Levy combines close ethnographic engagement with thoughtful reflection on memory, identity, and community. He's currently completing a new book, tentatively titled Reasserting the Jew, the Politics of Reminiscing in Contemporary Morocco, which we hope to hear more about during our conversation today.
Before we start, we kindly remind you that the seminar will be structured as usual, more or less. Will be 45 minutes of a conversation between Yuval and I with André, and have an hour of a Q&A. Roy Shukrun will be moderating the chat. So you're all welcome to write your questions there. And again, if someone wishes to open their microphone and ask their question directly, you're more than welcome to do so. Just make sure to let us know on the chat and wait for your turn. Welcome, André.
Yes, welcome, Andre. So let
Thank
me
you.
begin. Yeah, welcome. So let me begin with. So we're going to do the conversation with few questions, and then more structurally, and we'll open for broader conversation with the audience here. So let me begin with.
Sorry, Yuval, we don't hear you well. Maybe you
You
need the
don't hear me well?
microphone. Yeah, you need to come close to the microphone. Sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
I hear you fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me begin with the broader question. How do you understand the tension between mobility, rootedness, and belonging in the history of Moroccan Jewry, where movement and migration have been so central? And a related question, how do you approach the categories such as Sephardi, Arab Jews, and Mizrahi? Where do Moroccan Jews, with their internal diversities, fit within this broader conceptual field and these terms that these terms create?
Okay, thank you first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really honored and be back to one half of the organizer here, that is to the Schusterman Center, that I had the privilege of enjoying its hospitality. Well, I'll try to answer your question in the way in which my anthropology is guiding me, which means that I'll try to rely heavily on my day-to-day experience with people whom I try to understand. And to begin with, the idea of here and there and the distinction between these spaces in itself is problematic, because how do you know what are the limits of here that is not there, and vice versa? I'll begin by a simple ethnographic moment that occurred in the early 1990s. I'm that old. I, as an MA student, studied routes travel to Morocco of Israelis. It was the first travels. It was a kind of a moment of a very ecstatic historical moment, and the participants who were disconnected from there or here, Morocco, that is, living in Israel, and living with the notion that there will be no return to Morocco. And suddenly the gates were opened because of historical circumstances and political circumstances that I do not want to waste my time in explaining them. But anyhow, people, when they traveled there, they expected it will be here. That is, they expected Morocco to be the place they left not long ago, and that they will feel at home. So in fact, there was here in the sense that for them, Morocco was the place that they belonged to, that their memory are related to and are rooted in. And therefore, very interesting occurrences happened, because the Moroccans, on the other hand, thought that they are from there and not from here. And by minor gestures like feel at home, in fact, they told them that they are not home. Because, for instance, I don't say to my kids when coming from school, feel at home, because it's their home. Only when you want to tell to someone that it's not his home, you will tell him, well, feel at home. And that's exactly what the Israelis experienced. And it was a frustrating moment for them that caused many, many kind of heartbreaking moments. because also what they realized that their home, Morocco, was not as it was expected to be. I remember when we just went off the bus for one moment, for the first moment, I'm sorry, meeting the first Moroccans after a separation of about 40, 50 years. And some of the guys, it was a big, huge guy like that, step out of the bus, looking around and saying, wow, there are so many Arabs here. So for him, Morocco was not supposed to be with Arabs. And he immediately realized, and he just, hit his forehead and said, what did I expect to find here? Chinese. Okay, so Chinese were there, and here was something that was supposed to be here but doesn't look like here. And on the other side, on the other hand, as I said, the Moroccans themselves also treated them like tourists. They were not returnees. They were not homecoming. The rhetorics was of homecoming, but the reality, the gestures, the way in which they were tricked in the markets, in the souks, buying jalabias in an outraging amount of money, because they were just tricked as people who thought that they understand how commerce in these souks is conducted. But of course they didn't, and that's why they were tricked. And they had to pay a lot of money for very, very basic things. So the idea of here and there is very much situational, fluid, and one cannot really think about here and there as pre-fixed categories.
I want to go back to a part of Yuval's question about how you use the categories of Sephardi, Mizrahi, Arab, Jew, and what the place of Moroccan Jews here. But before we get into that, you just stopped at a perfect place. I think that I read with a lot of interest your work on the trip back to Morocco when I was writing my own work on the trip back to Morocco from a comparative perspective, from Moroccans who moved to Argentina and Moroccans who arrived in Israel. And one of the conclusions of this comparison is that Moroccan Argentines reported very much feeling at home, very much feeling welcomed, not being treated like tourists, being recognized. They didn't describe or report any fear. What became very interesting is the role of Israeliness and the process of becoming Israeli in mediating this relationship with one's own past and with the Moroccan Muslim, and how much, whether even the perception of others when you come from Israel is very very different than if you're coming from Argentina. And it's true that I focused on Spanish Morocco, which is it's a very particular case because there's also the language element that really makes things easier. But yeah, that was Go ahead.
Yeah. Can I comment on your point? Just exactly underscores or strengthen my point, which is that there is no one Morocco.
Exactly.
The Morocco people meet is conditioned by the baggage you bring with you. It's not that that Moroccan Jews in Israel were cut off Morocco and then lived in a limbo and then they came back to Morocco. They lived in Israel as Israelis. They experienced this kind of feeling like fear that you mentioned, and a totally different experience was meeting the Jews in Morocco. Because meeting the Jews in Morocco, they became way more Israelis. Because the first question they asked the Jewish Moroccans in, let's say, Casablanca was, "What are you doing here?" Which is a very Zionist approach to people who live in a place where they chose to live, or their history led them to live there. And they don't ask themselves why we are here. We're here because we're here. So each kind of encounter and each kind of baggage you bring to this encounter shapes your experience in it. And certainly the bloody war between Israel and the Arab countries and the Palestinians colors and shapes this experience.
Can we now go back to the question of Sephardi and Arab Jew and Mizrahi?
Yeah. Okay, here I have to explain a little bit about my anthropology. I'm not talking about the anthropology, but I'm talking about my anthropology. And my anthropology does not accept categories as given. That is, I do not. Of course, I don't think I'm not naive to think that I arrived tabula rasa to the field, but I must expose myself and let myself understand what people are saying. And for instance, in Morocco, the category Sephardi is it's not relevant. It's relevant only in the realm of religion, proper religious practices. But other than that, Sephardi is not a relevant category. In the same vein, you cannot talk about Mizrahi in Morocco. Morocco is Mizrahi is an experience or a category that was shaped and experienced by the Mizrahi in Israel. So for me, I use the term Moroccan Jews. Moroccan Jews, that was the category I used because they told me so. It's not because I came with the notion that this should be the relevant category, but because that's how people treated me. They treated me as an Israeli, and they were Moroccans. And they identify and saw themselves in Morocco. Even the division of the kind of northern Moroccan and southern Morocco, it was in a very minor way relevant, but in most times and in most circumstances, this was not a relevant category at all. And it's still now, even now, it's not. The category is we are Moroccans.
Can I first of all, yes, it's really interesting. I think it's a good way to really discover the problematic also with this and very limiting limited horizon of this kind of concept of Mizrahi, Arab Jews, and Sephardi has. But when you're speaking about the Israeli Moroccan coming to visit, so definitely these categories are in play. So there is the categories that are in Morocco, but there is the categories that people come with them, or even with the baggage that they already have. As Mizrahi Jews in Israel, that Moroccan maybe is one of the representation of it, with being marginalized, being stigmatized, and all of that baggage. Coming to Morocco and what they want to discover something else. They are not really talking about this baggage that they're coming with in this kind of meeting.
Yeah. Okay. So here I have to make a kind of fine tuning. Mizrahi category was not relevant to the Israelis who traveled to Morocco. They consider themselves in national category. That is, Moroccans. They felt like Moroccans, and we had, God forbid, we had a few Tunisians and Algerians that were like bizarre creatures that joined because of mixed marriage, because back then you couldn't get into Morocco unless you were born in Morocco. So people treated themselves as Moroccans. But interestingly, when we and the travel was really exhausting emotionally. It was like really an emotionally draining experience. And then it was full with lots of bad planning, very, very bad execution of the travel. It was like like just to give you some a simple example, the top of the creme de la creme of the travel was to go to the Hilula of Rabbi Shlomo al-Khder, not too far from Casablanca, like 14 minutes away from Casablanca, because they felt that they know Morocco, they knew how to get to the place, but they didn't. So we traveled with this bus almost 3 hours until we reached the place. And then when we got there, the Hilula was over. There was nothing left. So, and it's just one example of the very many problems that arose because of the very poor design and planning of the tour. But when we came back from Morocco, we had to stop in what was it? Not in Barcelona. We had to stop in Barcelona, and from Barcelona to fly to Israel. And in the airport, and after that in the plane, there was a group of Ashkenazi travelers, Israeli travelers, that had a kind of travel to, I think it was to South America, sightseeing, etc. But from the moment they met the Ashkenazim, they became Mizrahim. They stopped being Moroccan and they became Mizrahim because they had to handle the way in which they can negotiate and talk to and interact with the Ashkenazim, and to tell them about the very successful and wonderful and amazing trip they had. They couldn't, because they had to protect this Mizrahi identity at that moment. So in Morocco, they were Moroccans, but the moment they met the Ashkenazim, they became Mizrahim.
Interesting.
This is very, very interesting in terms of how the trip is remembered and how depending on who they're retelling the trip to, because I remember that one of the things that I found very striking when I was asking my interviewees about this trip back was the insistence on how in Israel, how dilapidated everything was, how backwards, how again the fear, and I remember responding because they went to the Douane, to Tangier, the place where my family comes from too. And I was annoyed. I was like clearly annoyed when they were saying that. First, because I knew it wasn't true, and well, for me, and so this dynamic was also very interesting to analyze. I had never thought about this. Like, what would have happened if instead of me, even someone else, like someone that they could clearly identify as Ashkenazi. This is very interesting, and I hadn't heard about that. Anyways, let's go on. So you've critiqued the traditional center-periphery model of a diaspora. And so what alternative frameworks might better capture the multiple centers and overlapping diasporas of Moroccan Jewry? You've already talked a little bit about this. I'm thinking specifically about your work, again, on going back to Morocco and Moroccan diasporas in Israel, as well as your theoretical developments on center and diaspora that have
Yeah,
influenced a lot
yeah,
of us.
yeah. As I said, my understandings or my theoretical thinking is heavily relying on my experiences while doing research. And let me begin again by a very simple scenario. As part of my research in Casablanca, I was struggling to meet also young Jewish Moroccan Jews. So I decided to teach at the Hebrew at one of the Jewish schools. And I was sure that I'll be a treasure for them,
Yeah. Have
educated
it all.
person, knows a bit Hebrew, etc. And I knew that they had the lack of Hebrew teachers. They were desperately looking for teachers. So I was sure I'll get a red carpet. But then they began to question my ability to teach Hebrew. And I was quite struck by it. And they told me, like, do you know dinim? Do you know the customs of holidays? And I was thinking, it has no relevancy to teach Hebrew.
But also
And then,
do.
hmm?
But also you do know that.
No, of course I know, but I was struck by the criteria they chose. As against the way in which, let's say, I knew that Hebrew is taught in Israel, not only to Olim Chadashim, but even at younger age when you are the first or second level in Israel. And finally, they accepted me, but this troubled me. It was, it nested in my head, and I couldn't get rid of wondering what the hell they wanted to find out. And then one of the days I spent in the ENH, École Normale Hébraïque, and they were preparing for the baccalaureate. I don't know how you say in English,
Like the graduation?
Yeah, graduation of your high school.
Of high school, yeah.
It's
Like
a
a
French.
bagrut.
It's a bagrut,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's a French, very prestigious bagrut.
Okay.
So for the exam, for the oral exam, came two French teachers from Paris to check their ability to converse in Hebrew.
In Hebrew?
Apparently, yeah, in Hebrew. It was a Hebrew test, a test in Hebrew. And the teachers apparently were former Israelis. And then a quarrel erupted because the teachers in Morocco, the Hebrew teachers in Morocco of this École Normale Hébraïque, claimed that they know how it is to converse in Hebrew, while the teachers or the examiners said that these two examiners said that they speak archaic Hebrew, and it's not, and the criteria should be to speak fluently with the young Israelis. And they went crazy. And they said, who said Israel is the standard of Hebrew? Israelis speak very bad Hebrew. They don't know Hebrew. They speak Israeli. They don't speak Hebrew. So I combined these two scenes and I began to think about where is the symbolic center? Who owns Hebrew and how you know it? And I came as an Israeli with my very common sense, that Hebrew is the language of Israel. And of course, I know Hebrew. But what they did is to say, you don't own this capital. We are way better. Morocco, in this sense, is the center of Hebrew. You are the diaspora of Hebrew. You're not the center. And then I began to gather more and more conversations that had to do not only with language, and that wanted to say that we are the Jewish center, where Israel is not, or maximum it is equal to us in its importance. For instance, they told me, look, Moroccan Jews in Israel are making ziyarah. They are making pilgrimage to Morocco. So where is the holy place, Morocco or Israel? Of course we are. We own these sacred places. We have a rich history. We have our rabbis. We have our dayanim. We have all these luminaries that came from us, from here. So here is the symbolic center and not Israel, or at least not only Israel. And this ability to reject the assumption that Israel is the center, and then you have diasporas around it, which are nourished by this center, is a totally false model. The model which I call the solar system model, one that says that there is one sun and you have orbits all around, and their very existence depends on this sun that provide life to the orbiting planets or whatever. And even the relationship between the planets is determined by their relationships to the sun. And what I heard from a very teeny tiny minority, Jewish minority in an Arab country, is to say, no, you're not. And in a way, it was the answer to the Israelis who told them, what are you doing in Morocco? What do you mean? What we are here in Morocco because this is a Jewish center. It's not a diaspora.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and I think it's connected. So we spoke a bit about nation and national identity, about language, and about different kind of interpretation of place. And now I want to go more deeper to religion. And in your work, you do an interesting work on when you're covering religious sites in Morocco, Jewish religious sites. You're talking a lot about the coexistence of Jewish Muslim traditions and as shared history. So first of all, if you can say something about that. And second, how these traditions are being translated when Moroccan Jews are moving to Israel. Does this kind of Jewish-Muslim coexistence continue with that there when they're practicing in Israel? Something is changing in that kind of, traditions.
Yeah. I'll begin by not embracing the concept of coexistence. Coexistence means very clear boundaries, and then some occasions in which the boundaries do not bother encounters. And I here adopt the concept of a very dear friend of mine, a very esteemed anthropologist called Michael Herzfeld. And Michael Herzfeld speaks about or talks about cultural intimacy. And I like this concept because intimacy does not necessarily mean good relationships or coexistence or whatever. It means a very deep understanding of one and the other. There is, you truly are part of this ecosystem of a certain cultural um, uh, existence. It's not that I'm talking about good relationships. Intimacy can lead to disastrous relationships. But nevertheless, these are intimate relationships, which means that there are things that you don't have to explain to the other side in order to interact with him. He'll understand exactly when you do a gesture with your hand, or you blink with your eye, or you use a certain term. He'll understand exactly what you're talking about. There is no chance that he will not understand you. And the most intimate and most very close to your heart, be it codes of conduct or norms or values or whatever, you share them in the most deep sense. I can and this create a mutual or a mutual boundary that puts you together within this space. I can give a very simple example to illustrate what I mean. Let's say I'm at home and I'm walking at home and I'm using here now a metaphor to Sartre. I have a hole in my sock, in one of my socks. I don't feel it when I'm at home. I walk around and I don't care that my kids see or my wife sees it. It doesn't exist. But if I hear steps in the stairway or a knocks on my door, all of a sudden I'll be embarrassed. This embarrassment creates the boundary between this stranger and this community. So we share this intimacy that includes all these embarrassing moments that are not embarrassing when we are within us. Only when we imagine an exterior, then we feel the embarrassment, and this embarrassment creates the boundary. And Jews and Muslims in Morocco for years, hundreds of years, shared this cultural intimacy.
And what happened when they moved to Israel? With the same kind of traditions.
Well, the entire system, the social system, is different now, and you don't. In Israel, most Israelis don't meet Muslims, so you can.
Muslims. Yeah, but they meet a
No,
lot of Muslims.
No,
but
I
not
think
Moroccan
that,
Muslims. Yeah.
No. I'm talking about Muslims, Palestinians. How many Palestinians,
They would meet
relatively
them
to
in the market, in the workplace, but maybe not in the same level of.
It's not. It's in Morocco. There was no chance that a Muslim will pass a day without meeting several Jews. It was an impossibility. In Israel,
how is it in Israel,
you don't
depending on
find
where
it.
you live, right? I guess that also depends.
Of course.
Specifically, Moroccan Jews.
If you live in Ma'alot Tarshiha, then you have greater, but these are not the same Muslims, or as they say, they don't say Muslims, which is part of the break that happened. It's not the same Arabs. They call them now Arabs. In Moroccan, when you spoke about them, you spoke about Muslims. Muslims means Muslims. And in Israel, they turn to the French expression and they say les Arabes. So it's a totally different population. But I have to say that it didn't happen with immigration. It happened way before, when the French colonialism penetrated to Morocco, when the presence, even before taking over Morocco, you had a very deep wave of destabilizing cultural assumptions, taken for granted, etc., etc., etc. And we have to say, it's very important that the Jews adopted French culture. They wanted to turn so already in Morocco, Muslims felt that Jews betray their national aspiration to get rid of the French colonialism, and they became those who identified with the enemy. Now, I don't blame the Jews because Jews had very good reasons to identify with French culture. They had a lot to gain by it. But the rupture began already in the beginning of the 20th century, way before they migrated to Israel. When they established the Alliance schools, for instance. When they moved to cities, I think if I remember correctly, in the beginning of the 20th century, you had about already more than 40% of the Jews were city dwellers.
Much more. At the beginning of the 20th century? Much more.
Even much more, yeah. Yeah, I
Much
think
more,
in
much more. It was
yeah. So the entire way of living was dramatically changed.
This is also a social class question because and this process of foreignization of Jews affected Jews who hadn't necessarily become Westernized, because this was very much a question of social class. Even in the case of Spanish Morocco, maybe the most clear case of assimilation with the colonial culture, it was also a matter of social class. If you focus on the Juderia, the Jewish quarter, they didn't adopt as many Spanish habits and stuff as in the Ensanti, in the places of where the middle classes and the upper middle classes lived. But so I think that this process is related to social class, and this rupture ended up affecting even those who weren't necessarily engaged.
Because for instance, I'm trying to be brief because there are lots of details to give. But for instance, Jews left their villages, and there was this kind of demographic rupture already occurring towards the end of the 19th century.
Yes,
people left their small villages and moved to bigger cities like Marrakesh, Fez, Meknes, and of course Casablanca. So and the pattern of migration was also very interesting because it wasn't like families moving. It began by seasonal jobs. So young people in the villages would leave during seasonal works to places like Casablanca or Marrakesh or whatever and to work there, and then come back with the fortune they earned to their villages. But gradually they stopped moving back and forth and stayed in the big city. And then you had the family joining them later. So it was like a two steps, I would say, a two steps migration within Morocco. So it means that in Morocco, even villagers severed themselves from their neighbors in the villages. And they came to live in a place where to use simple terms, the Gemeinschaft became a Gesellschaft. And
we have 15 more minutes. So we should move on.
Yes, only for our discussion. Yes, and then
exactly. So you've touched upon some of this already, but so how does the diasporic or post-migration condition transform Moroccan Jewish identity linguistically, culturally, and spiritually, in the case of Moroccan Jewish identity in Israel. And what does this reveal about the Moroccan Jewish experience of modernity? I myself have worked on the Spanish-speaking Jewish communities of Morocco and their migration to Israel and Argentina. One of the most striking effects of migration was having to adapt to a much more dichotomic social world in Israel and the Americas, where ambiguity was much less tolerated, and there was a need to identify oneself as religious, secular, for example, which of course relates to other dichotomic choices as well. And to the way, and this also relates to the way their past in Morocco was socially represented and their responses to that representation. So I wonder what you've seen in your own field work about this phenomenon and what you can say about other modernities, such as Moroccan Jewish modernities.
Are you referring to the Moroccan Jews in Morocco or in Israel?
Well, both, but specifically about the transition from Moroccan Jewish modernity as such, and then the movement to Israel, which leads to a different experience of modernization.
Okay, I'll begin by a personal story. When I was very, very young, I was, I think, 6 or 7. Like a year or so after my parents migrated from Casablanca to Ashdod. And we lived in a neighborhood where we had a very nearby synagogue. And my father was not religious at all. In Israel, he began to go to frequent synagogues on Friday evening and Saturdays. I don't know if you Angy, will like this story. You'll understand in a second. And one of the Saturday before Torah reading, the Chazan of the synagogue said, "I want to declare something very explicitly. This synagogue is only a Sephardi synagogue. It's not Merakshi, it's not Fazi, it's not Meknesi. It is Sephardi." And my father was really insulted. And that moment he left the synagogue and went to find another. He was from Marrakesh, but he couldn't find in a walking distance a synagogue of Marakshi people. So he went to the Meknasi, which was a kind of compromise for him. But there he found himself. So what I'm trying to illustrate is that, as you, Angy, correctly emphasized, there was a cleavage between the north and the center and south of Morocco. And the differences between non-Sephardi and Toshavim, if you like, was more salient and more present than the distinction between someone who came from Marrakesh to someone who came from Essaouira, let's say. And so he found himself at ease with the Meknasi synagogue, and he left so these. And gradually, these distinctions faded away in Morocco, in Israel. I'm sorry, to the point that you now find, of course, synagogues that are Sephardim, that are that you cannot find city-based or local-based synagogue anymore in Israel. What you find is a kind of unification of practices which in a way go halfway with the vision of Ovadia Yosef, that wanted to create a new halacha in the entire Judaism in Israel. So it's not that it didn't reach to that point, but you feel the category of Sephardim way more salient in Israel. Now you have Sephardi synagogues and Ashkenazi synagogues, but again, as I think I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the Sephardi category in Israel is most relevant to the religious sphere, and it's less so in other spheres. Even if you would ask a Shas voter the meaning of Shas, I'm not sure he'll know that it's Sfaradim in it. I'm not sure.
Okay,
And
so I want to,
yeah.
Sorry, do you want
No,
to?
no.
No,
Okay,
so I want to
continue.
move now to your new book.
Okay.
New book.
We have 8 minutes.
Yes, so our
Okay.
conversation then will
Okay.
open, of course, and please put your questions in the chat box. So
Okay.
your new book is focusing on the reappearance of the Jew in Morocco.
Yeah.
And from what I understand your focus is you want to shift the gaze from a Jewish-centric point of view to more Moroccan Muslim point of view of that kind of phenomenon. So if you can say something about, about your new project, how it fits your larger, research, work, what is the contribution that you want to make in this book?
Okay, here, to be honest, it's totally different from what I've done until now, not only because of the groups that I study. In the recent, let's say, 15, 20 years, there is an amazing phenomenon in Morocco, which in simple terms, I could call as the celebration of the Jew. That is, you find expressions, cultural expression, legal expressions. You have in the last Moroccan amendment to the Constitution, the Moroccan Constitution, the Hebrew culture is part of the identity of Morocco. You have the king participating in all kinds of inauguration of new synagogues or the restoration of the Mellah in Marrakesh, the Jewish ghetto in Marrakesh. You have a synagogue, as I said, and you have organizations that advocate the are you hearing me? Because there was a lapse here. Okay.
Yeah, no, but now it's okay.
Okay, and there was you have NGOs that take upon themselves the mission of creating caravans that describe Jewish customs, Jewish history, and they move all over Morocco. They cover Morocco. They create events mutual to Jews and Muslims. For instance, in the synagogue I studied, the Al-Azama synagogue in Marrakesh, they had, now we are in Ramadan, donation for the iftar, for the poor people that cannot allow themselves to buy food for the iftar, for the break of the fast. They give bags with lots of food to poor people, etc. It's like there is no, and it can even happen in the most mundane occurrences. Like I was standing in a line in the bakery, and there was before me an old person, and then all of a sudden, without any provocation, we stood quiet. He turned around, looked at me, and began to curse me. I was like in a shock. I didn't know what he wanted. And then he apologized and he said, I'm in such a distress that the Jews left Morocco. I know that you're a Jew. He knew that I'm a Jew. And I know, and since you left, Morocco is in a bankruptcy. We need the Jew. We miss them. They must come back. And it happens like in every every most banal development. So I was struck by it, and I tried to understand it, and I tried also to think, why now? Why now, when you don't have practically any Jew in Morocco, this admiration of the Jew? And I have an hypothesis that I'm trying now to develop that is related theoretically to James Scott's contribution on everyday resistance. That is, my gut feeling is that this interest of the Jew has nothing to do with the Jew. The Jew is not the point. The Jew is not an interesting idiom in itself. It is a tool to challenge the social, cultural, legal order in Morocco. And therefore, when you look at the activists, not from the king, I'm not talking about the king and the palace, which also is invested in it, but here the political consideration and are quite plain. You don't have to be very smart to understand what they are doing. But when you look at the NGOs or activists in these NGOs or other groups, what you see is that many of them belong to a kind of marginal identity. You see a lot of Amazigh people, what we call Berber. You see homosexuals, lesbians, or other groups that their interests are not represented in Morocco, but their claim to equality doesn't stand a chance.
Mm.
You cannot say, I want my rights as a lesbian. It will not work. But you can carve a rhetorics that allow the idea of pluralism to get in through a cultural idiom that is not threatening. The Jew is not threatening. The Jew was never threatening, but now even more so because he's not even there. He's not even there to respond to the way in which he is used to promote other ideas and other interests of other groups.
Mm.
So this is basically the outline of what I'm trying to do now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's interesting also to see the comparison to other places in the Middle East. In Egypt and Iraq, there is the same return to the Jew. I'm not sure
And you
it's the
have it
same
also in
intensity
Poland.
that there is in Morocco.
You have it in Poland.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, so
I think it's
very interesting.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, no. Go ahead.
I think it's time to open the floor for questions. We have half an hour for Q&A. We are right on time. We should be very proud of ourselves.
So just tell me how you want to do it, to accumulate question
Roy
or...
Shukran is going to, he will ask a question himself, but he's going to handle this now.
Yes, I'm going to, we have a few questions, so I'll just go ahead and start asking a few and then give you them to answer, a few at a time. The first one we have, and if anybody from the audience wants to ask themselves, please note in the chat that you would like to speak, and I will give you the floor in your turn. Leslie Alperin is asking, and answer these questions however it makes sense for you. Do Sephardic Jews feel closer to Morocco than Israel? That's kind of like a large question there, but answer it in the way that makes sense to you. Galit Hokem asks, does the phrase, something you said before, does the phrase, there is no one Morocco, does that also reflect the internal diversity and multiculturalism and syncretism of the country and its people? And a personal question for you, how does your own identification as Israeli with Moroccan roots condition your interaction with the people that you meet now? Maybe let's start with those, and we can move on to another one.
Okay, I'll begin by the last and go from there.
Okay.
How am I as an Israeli in Morocco? Oh yeah, I don't know if we said I live now in Rabat with my family to do among other thing. This is not the only reason, but one of the reasons for me to be here is this book that I'm trying to write. So, of course, I don't feel at home. I don't feel at home, but also in Israel, I don't feel at home. I used to say, now I don't know why I don't say it any longer, but that in every language I have an accent. That is, there is a kind of distance that I feel. Of course, the distances are different, but there is no place where I can that I feel that I can be totally intimate with. So, as an Israeli, Moroccans, the Moroccans that I meet, intellectuals, journalists, TV people, academics, whoever, they are this is the group that fantasize that Moroccan Jews will come back to Morocco. This is the group that is part of my study. And for them, the fact, at least that's what they insist on telling me, and it's not one or two, but almost everybody are saying it. You're Moroccan, and we don't care about the rest. You're Moroccan, and we don't think that your other attachments is relevant to the fact that you're here, you're with your family, and you live here, you have a car, you go to restaurants there. That's it. You are part of the country. And the fact that, for instance, my Darija is not that fluent, it's good, but not that good. As I said, there is a distance from every language that I speak. Doesn't bother them because Darija, luckily, is constructed in such a way that no one knows fully Darija, because each region has its own expression, its own vocabulary. So the Darija is not like a really tightly bounded language. So everybody makes mistake, and I maybe make some more, but we are all in this same boat as we see in Hebrew. And this is related to, I think it was Galit who asked, hi Galit, that about the variety of the groups in Morocco. It's true that Morocco is a huge country. Even speaking geographically, it's a huge country. It's very diverse, extremely, extremely diverse. I remember that my first time that I realized that there are people in Morocco who don't speak Arabic nor Darija. They speak Tamazight, and that's it. And I couldn't talk to them. And the first time that I encountered it, I thought that my Darija was not clear enough until I realized, no, they don't speak Darija at all. So it's very diverse, and the fact that it's diverse, it can really absorb lots of differences within it. And I don't have a sense that there is a demand to unify Morocco. And this is particularly true during the reign of Mohammed VI, the current king, because the one before him, he tried quite brutally to impose a certain unification. He, for instance, didn't allow the printing of books or newspapers in Tamazight, the language of the Amazigh, or what we call the Berbers. You couldn't have a TV channel in Tamazight. So he worked very hard. You cannot have your name in Tamazight. Tamazight names are taboo. You cannot use them. So, but nowadays, and it's not nowadays, it's just like about 20, 30 years that there is a more laissez-faire attitude and ability to really accept the huge variance of being Moroccan, I'm sorry, in Morocco. I forgot the first question. Sorry.
No, it's okay. The first question was just, I'll add more questions now. The first question was just...
You just answered it, Andrew, when you talked about the diversity. And thank you very much. It's been fascinating. I don't know why my picture doesn't project. It's probably the current situation here that makes me black instead of... you can't see me. But
I don't even see you.
No.
There's no video.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You.
Okay, so let's move on. First of all, one person is just asking very briefly, when again was this trip that you took to Morocco for the original master studies that you did? Rishona Fine is asking, was there a regional variation in the acculturation of Jews to French colonization, or with the Alliance before? Did relationships with their neighbors not differ if they were more Berber speaking or more Arabic speaking? Danubiton is asking about an article that you published about identifying Jews in the street, and if you have a comment to make about that. And I'm going to add a question of my own, which is there is a well-known organization that's active in Marrakesh, Kulna, that brings a lot of Israeli volunteers to Morocco to do restorative work and study and everything. And they work both between Israel and study and in Morocco. And I wonder if you've had interactions with them, and what do you think about the work that they're doing? How does it fit into your research and how you know what you're studying?
Okay. So since my memory is very limited, I'll begin by the last one that I remember, and then we'll move on. No, the trip it's an informative question. It was I think it was in 1991. I think it was one of the first. I think it was in 1990 that the King Hassan Al Thani was first interviewed by the one and only Israeli TV back then, by Ehud Yaari. And this opportunity, he said that he invites all his sons and daughter to go back to Morocco. He didn't say Israelis, but it was clear from the setting that he related to the Israelis, and so the beginning was quite arduous, and it was full with problems because it wasn't really formalized. That is, it was not clear how you can get in with a Israeli passport to Morocco, how you can arrange it, and it created a lot of also rumors about briberies, about all kinds of very stressful events around this. Okay, so this is about, unless there is a follow-up to the question? No.
None of that one.
Okay, now you'll help me.
I asked
One
about
by one.
Kulna. No problem. I asked about
Okay,
Kulna.
about Kulna. I know a bit about Kulna. I know way more about another one that is a Muslim one that is called Mimuna Association. I assume many people heard about it. The Kulna is, if I recall, it's a kind of volunteers who come to Morocco, and this is something that I'm less interested in my book. That is, I'm not interested in the Israeli perspective. I want to get rid of the Israeli Jewish perspective and want to understand only the Moroccans here. Therefore, that's why I'm not that. I saw them, and there is another group that is called the Israelis with a Z, I think, that also are visiting Morocco and trying to convince them that Israel is a wonderful place, etc., etc. So all these groups are not interesting to me because they represent the Israeli perspective. But I'm interested more in the organization like Morocco Pluriel or as I mentioned, the Mimuna Association, which is a Muslim young people who are advocating the idea of promoting and educating Moroccans about the Jewish Moroccan history, because indeed there was an immense silence about the Jews in Morocco. It was almost a taboo to speak about or to question why did they left. Because the argument was that Jews were very good in Morocco. They felt good, they were treated good, they were our brothers, etc., etc. But then, if it's true, why did they leave? And the maximum you could get for many years was Zionism, which of course is true, but it's a very unsophisticated and non-very complicated or nuanced answer. And only now they begin to tackle this question by talking about the way in which Jews used to be here in Morocco. Remind me one by one, there is a great chance that I'll be able to answer.
No worries. Danu Biton asks about an article that you wrote about identifying Jews in the streets.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the question, or just to relate to it?
Yeah, he just asked for you to elaborate on that article. I don't know if you can briefly say if you have an experience with that.
Yeah, I'm a non-essentialist person. But I was struck by the fact that Jews could recognize Jews they have never met before in the streets of Casablanca or Marrakesh and this was baffling. So how can you explain it? So you have the immediate or the sleeve answers like, well, to talk about bodily hexes by Bourdieu, etc., etc. But I felt that it's not good enough. And what I'm trying to do, without success, is to try to explain this. It's a heroic effort, and even more so, a heroic failure, I have to admit.
Well, keep trying.
If there is no more question, I have a question that is follow-up to his question. Because, I understand that you don't want to have a Jewish-centric project. But for me, definitely if you want to do a comparison to other places in the Middle East when they return to the Jew, when Jews are not returning, There's no Jews coming to visit Iraq now. Maybe in Egypt less, but not in Iraq. They don't see the real Jew. But for me, it will be interesting if you compare with these real Jews that are coming, Israeli Jews that are coming, and how now the image of the Jew is being, reflected. Is it there is any tension now that the real Jew is coming, that is maybe representing something else of the Jew that you want to represent? Because now there is a real Jews coming to Morocco, right, and doing
In good days you had about 40,000, I guess, more or less. The figures are not that clear, but let's say tens of thousands of Israelis every year. Now their attitude is very instrumental. That is, they are a good resource for business, for tourism business, and that's the main issue for many Moroccans here. There is no romantic attitudes towards it, because
but does it affect how they see the image of the Jew? Does it? Because not only tourists are coming. Chaim Luk is coming and giving Netal Kayam and other coming to a concert, right? A big concert. They're representing the old Jew. They're representing a new Jew that they're coming from Israel. So how this walk around?
Okay, what they see is an opportunity to see, and I'm talking about this, not about the tourists, because tourists is a very instrumental perspective. But people like Netal Kayam or Chaim Luk, or even myself, coming back to Morocco, we are in a way an opportunity to peek to the past, because our Moroccanness froze in a way, or was influenced by the Israeli experience, but it was severed from the developments of the Moroccan culture. For instance, when I first wanted to ask in a restaurant for a plate, I used the way in which in my home we used to say it, but nobody knows this word anymore. It's a kind of festive word. And for me when I'm speaking, it's almost always happening. The people look at me and smile with a kind of compassion, pity, and nostalgia, because it sounds like you're not from here. You're not from this time. You talk like my grandmother. That's the way they. So we provide an opportunity for people to look at Morocco as it used to be.
Yossi, you had the question? I thought that you had, but unmute Yossi Yona, Professor Yossi Yona, but just unmute yourself.
Yossi, we can't hear you.
Unmute. We can hear you. Can you unmute
No.
him?
There you go.
Yes.
I know.
Okay, now?
Yeah.
Yes.
So first, André, thank you very much for the presentation. I enjoyed it very immensely. Really, it was fun.
Thank you.
And I very much enjoy, this example about the Hebrew thing. Wow. But then, related to that, my question is the following. I'm familiar with your theory, with your very good kind of thesis and argument, the solar system and the satellites. Now, my question is, this idea about multicentrism, to a certain extent, I guess that it is not novel in the sense that there are Jewish cultural centers around the world, like, I don't know, United States, Argentina, France, and so forth and so on. And my question is anything unique about the case of Morocco and that it challenges the centralism of Israel or perceiving Israel as a central kind of a Hebrew culture that it is the standard whereby every country or every Jewish center in the world would have to obey or abide by it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'll use the term in Hebrew first. Al achat kama v'chama. I don't know if you can translate it into English. Anyone? Never mind. What?
I don't know how to translate that.
Yeah, I don't know either.
There's
Okay,
a sense of intimacy that connects us all, and we know.
So what I'm trying to say by this expression is that if in Morocco, which is from now an Israeli perspective,
More says Galit.
מה? Even more so.
Even
yeah, תודה גלית. כמובן העזרה מגלית. Okay. If a place like Morocco, which is now I'm talking from the Israeli perspective, it's an Arab country, an enemy country, or used to be enemy country, with a very minor Jewish community, like very few people live there. Even they refute the model. So the argument will be even more so, or even more simple to draw on places like Manhattan or Paris or whatever. So because if it works with such a feeble community, and even they can dare and say to Israel, we do not accept your hegemony relating to language, relating to Jewish culture, etc., etc. Of course, it's easier to claim it about I don't know, the boyarins.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is that I'm taking a very difficult case to prove my argument, and it works even with them.
Thank you.
Okay, I invite Yolande Cohen in the audience to ask a question.
I want to remind everyone that we have 6 minutes left.
Yes,
so
this will have to be the last question.
Thank you all, and thank you very much, André, for your great talk. And I'm really curious of, yes, you explained to us very clearly that this is your work. I'm really startled when you said that you were living in Rabat. Can you, is it just for research, or did you want to go back? I know you're an anthropologist, so you want to mix with the population. Is it for a year? Is it for more? I was struck by that. So I'm sorry, if it is too personal, you don't have to answer. But in any case, I really enjoyed your talk. And I think you are totally right in the consideration that the Moroccan Jews are trying to exchange this identity, which is theirs, with a Sephardic one, which is a reconfiguration of their identity in the diaspora. I don't know about Israel, but I can tell you that in Canada, they embraced the Sephardi identity with some kind of fervor, as well as adding to that identity the one of being Francophone. So it was really interesting to see how this display and this work with their own several or plural identities is really quite interesting to know, to see how it is used in the diaspora. As you had been saying for Israel, I confirm. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that there was a question about whether you're living in Rabat, and it's just for research. What is your experience?
Yeah. I wasn't prepared for this question, and therefore I didn't ask my family to their permission to reveal the other reasons for us to be in Morocco, and that's why I'm sorry I cannot answer you.
Fine.
Okay.
I just want to add a final comment. I think I agree that the category Sephardi um, does is not relevant for at least the Sephardic groups that I've studied, meaning that it is not a category that that people use beyond a religious context. However, I do think it is a very useful category when we try to think about more general trends of Jewish modernization. Beyond the specific experiences of specific communities, I think that this is a category that is flexible enough to invite us to think about a different model of Jewish modernization that I think is based on this cultural intimacy that you were mentioning, which, as you very well explained, makes room for tension, conflict, violence, for everything that is included in intimacy.
Can
But
I
also,
relate? Oh,
sorry,
okay,
yeah,
yeah. No.
yeah, just to finish, I think that this alternative model of Jewish modernization that we can call for ease Sephardi relates to a general to a multiplicity of trends that could be summarized under this cultural intimacy and for a very high level of tolerance to ambiguity in terms of observance, in terms of belonging, in terms this high level of ambiguity and this cultural intimacy, I think would be the two key elements of what we could call Sephardic models of Jewish modernizations or something like that. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to relate to one of the association we have when we think about Sephardi is the moderation. But now, for me to stop at this point is not revealing enough. For instance, the tolerance of the rabbi in Morocco, I'll focus in Morocco, is mainly due to their political weakness.
Oof.
They
We're getting
couldn't.
into a huge thing.
Okay, so let's finish with a bang.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is that they couldn't have like the concept of the cherem you had in Europe. You didn't have it. You didn't have it
Right.
because rabbis were poor. I'll give you just one example, and maybe with this we'll conclude. In one of my research that I conducted with my supervisor, Yoram Bilu and Harvey Goldberg, we studied a very small settlement called Ulad Mansour. And there, people told us that their village was exactly on the crossroad of boundaries between two tribes. So there was Dayan that decided a certain thing about a Jew, and in order to defy what the rabbi ruled, he just stepped 1 meter away, and he was under the protection of another powerful patron. And he then could say, as the kids say, bye-bye. I don't accept your ruling. So until the system of the consistoire under the French modern system was created, that is the kind of bureaucratization of the rabbinic rule, rabbis were not powerful, and therefore they had to be tolerant, and not vice versa.
This should be a theme for another conversation.
Okay. Okay.
Well,
Okay,
thank
thank
you,
you very
everybody.
much, Andre.
Yeah.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Angy. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It was a wonderful conversation. It will be available on the Brandeis on the Schusterman Center at Brandeis YouTube channel soon. So if you want to watch it again or to send to a friend.
And don't forget to follow us on the next meeting on April 16th with Orit Yekutieli, between Israel and Morocco, Jewish Moroccan cultural displays in the homeland and the diaspora. We are in a continued Moroccan theme this year. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, André. This was fascinating. Thank you for agreeing to this format.
Thank you.
And we will be in touch. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
thanks, sir. Thanks to everybody. Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.